This episode of Bend the Knee is brought to you by Maester Jamie of the White Owl. We read and we know things.
Hello and welcome to Bend the Knee, a Song of Ice and Fire podcast. I am Sir Matt, the Bud Knight.
And I am Sir Ezra the Watchful. Welcome to our Song of Ice and Fire book club. We've got a good one for you today. We are so amped for this. We're finally there. We're talking today about Aegon's Conquest and then Jon 2, Chapter 10 in A Game of Thrones. So really could not be more excited for this. We've done a lot of research. And there's more research to be done.
Yeah, it's a lot. This is a very, very big thing. But first, Ezra, I thought we should read a correction.
Yeah.
We asked you guys to correct us on anything, and we got one from Robert H. Sent us an email. Hey guys, I noticed several times in the last Follow-Up Friday podcast, you guys called the House of Black and White the House of Undying. The latter is the Warlock's Palace in Karth, where Pyat Pri tries to kill Dany and steal her dragons. The House of Black and White is where the Faceless Men conduct their practices and worship. I hate to be the actually guy, but I wanted to clear that up. Thanks, guys. Love hearing your podcast so far. Looking forward to getting more involved as I have a few theories I would love to share.
Good, and that's good.
Oh, and he says Sir Huck of, and then he leaves it blank. I'll leave that a mystery for now.
Oh, okay, nice.
Yeah.
No, as soon as Matt said that, actually, I think after we finished recording or whatever, like the second time, because I know I said it once, and then I said it a second time, and I literally start to, like, sometimes, like, mid-show, we will, like, go, like, I'm, like, Googling, I'm like, wait a second, what did I just say? And I, like, start to kind of Google it or whatever, and I was like, that is not right. What am I saying? So, anyways, super, and those are, you know, the cool thing about those episodes.
They're both in, oh, yeah.
Well, just that they're really off the cuff. You know what I mean? So I normally don't have a computer in front of me. We come home from work and we're just plowing into it. So yeah, thank you very much. We really
thanks for that
appreciate
correction. That's a very good point here. So
well, and like this, I mean, this Aegon's Conquest. I mean,
there's probably might be some errors in this one. Yeah,
I mean, just because, you know, or there's more connections we could have made to current day, you know, houses and characters, but that. In and of itself, that's going to be another follow-up. I mean, this is we almost should have done this in two parts, but
we're thinking about it. But
yeah, but we'll come back to it again.
The next chapter in the World of Ice and Fire is specifically just Aegon the First, I believe. So we're gonna break it down further.
We'll still have those players.
This is kind of just the over. And normally, when we originally started this, we were just going to do like brief summaries of the World of Ice and Fire. But it's just there's so much into it, and it's so important. And obviously, listeners really seem to like it because it seems like this is what, maybe it's because the chapters themselves have been kind of short because it's just getting going.
You're right.
But this is what you guys have been asking for and asking us questions and theories about. So we're gonna just dive deeper and deeper into it. So
yeah, because I think most people have read, you know, the series. It's been out for, you know, a while.
Or seen the show. You know the general story.
And so diving into World of Ice and Fire is a hell of a lot of fun. So all right, let's real quick, just a couple updates here. If you would like to provide us with your vows, if you've taken the black, you can call in and do that, or, you know, send us a voice memo if you'd like to. But if you want to call or any questions, anything you guys have, the number is 614-547-2350. Give us a ring. Even for Follow-Up Fridays, we'll play those and kind of talk through your guys' questions and what have you. Also, send us a raven at btkcast@gmail.com. Just want to get that out in the front.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's go ahead and head over to the Small Council. This is where we do scripted news from the HBO show and anything going on Not a Blog, Gur's thing. But real quick, any updates on life, Sir Ezra?
Well, Sir Matt, we're busy. We're busy. So we're deep in research, still working on some of our theories. It takes a while to put some of that stuff together. So that's really what I've been working on. Got a couple other side projects I work on, but for the most part, just busy, man. I mean, trying to get into summer here. spring, I guess. But just want to get to my
a wish for spring.
Wow. Yeah, absolutely. So not much. What about you though?
Oh, same thing. A lot of side projects, some potential life kind of changing, new directions for me. Hopefully coming soon. Maybe going to conquer a different region of the world. Wow. So I've got, I'm going to call, trying to rally some bannermen and, plan on marching westward.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
So that's
that is exciting. I'm excited because I will answer the call, Sir Matt. Okay.
Yeah. So that's what's going on there. But all right, let's go ahead and dive into some show news and things like that. So, I believe this was Gur had kind of mentioned this on Not-a-Blog before and things like that. And sometimes when I just pull kind of show news, I just find it, it can be from these like totally random clickbait news websites.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
But so one of the things, I found two things this week I found kind of interesting. Gur has said he no longer wants to read free, as he calls them, Winds of Winter chapters, which he has done at events and things like that, because he says you're not getting any more sneak peeks at Winds of Winter, even if you're royalty. Gur's been pretty generous with sample chapters from Winds of Winter. When he talked about Fire and Blood, some fans had asked for some more sample chapters from Winds of Winter, and he responded, I don't know, the author wrote, I think I've probably released too many sample chapters already. Putting them all together, and there are probably more than 100 pages. He's always enjoyed reading sample chapters at conventions, but he said he's been dinged for the practice in the past, and he's been criticized in some of his books saying it's old, retread materials. In the minds of some, what should have been brand new reading experience became old and familiar. It is not worth it putting up sample chapters and giving readings if it means it will come back to bite me in the ass when the book is finally published. And he's specifically there talking about how that was a reference to the Book of Swords, where he has a kind of sample, or it's material, but it's kind of drawn from other things. And he'd read it and things in the past and kind of expanded upon it. And so people had said that. Well,
they're disappointed. They were expecting that to be new stuff on Sons of the Dragon, and it was really, he had actually read it some of it verbatim, right? Yeah.
And I think that's also maybe similar with those old novellas he did, like the Daenerys one, the Queen of Dragons, or whatever it is. Yeah. And I actually found a PDF of that online, and I was like skimming through it, and I was like, wow, this just looks like all the Daenerys chapters from the first book, and that's kind of what it is, and stuff like that. So, but anyway, that was like in the 90s, and the internet didn't really exist like it does today. So
right. Yep.
So okay, so then some other quick news. I guess here, Wilf Scolding, who is an actor who played Rhaegar Targaryen, had posted a picture of just like him on Instagram outside a hotel in Belfast. On Instagram, and then he kind of like immediately like took it down a couple hours later. But of course, people were retweeting it and stuff like that. So he played Rhaegar Targaryen in like the one scene we saw, and so this hotel is where like a lot of the actors who stay in those filming locations are kind of known to stay. So everyone's theorizing that we'll get a Rhaegar flashback scene, perhaps turning at Harrenhal,
right,
or something like that.
Well, what's neat about that is, like you said, it's the same. It's the younger version of Rhaegar, right? So that would be a flashback of some kind. But I wonder, if all those theories are true, and who he might be, side by side acting with,
Yeah.
So, or the sequence of events, the shot, is it old Rhaegar reflecting on younger self,
Yeah.
Okay,
it's possible. So okay, all right. So this week we're going to do the reread first, because it's really kind of short, and that way for those of you who specifically come to us for the reread, you can get that, and then we will dive into the probably hour to 2 hour long discussion of Aegon's Conquest.
Yeah. So which one? We're doing which first?
The Jon chapter.
Oh, we're doing that first.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. Gotta switch gears then a little bit.
Oh, sorry.
So we're gonna jump into the reread here. In recap, so chapter 9, Tyrion. The horrors were wailing when Tyrion Lannister announced his intention to go north to the Wall. Tyrion discusses the condition of Bran Stark with his family. So he ends up slapping Joffrey and telling him to go, pay his respects, and talks with his siblings. And it's kind of this...
wonder what side you're on.
Exactly. Real interested in seeing what may be, happening with young Bran Stark. So, so there's our recap. Do we have any comments on the last chapter?
Not really.
I think we kind of did. That's all in follow-up Friday stuff, really. So it's where we used to kind of mention a few things here, but I think basically if something were to happen after follow-up Friday, like Saturday and Sunday, we might include that in here. But for the most part, if you guys leave us comments up through Thursday on the new episode, that gets taken care of in follow-up Friday. Yeah. So, which is cool.
And we do have one Raven that we'll read at the end of this podcast that pertains to the coming up chapter.
Right. Exactly. Okay. So this chapter, John, this is John 2, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I noticed that real quick about that. Is there a version of the books? I don't know. Perhaps people can tell us, or do people just manually go in when they reference things as like John 2, John 3, whatever? Because the version I have just says John.
Right.
Is that just something that people
have just counted?
Okay.
Yeah, just the number of point of views.
Right, I've just been going in and adding like John 2, John.
Yeah, you just mark.
And I just want to know the proper way to
that's
reference that, because then I've also seen when we get into the later books, some people will say like John 73 or whatever, but then some people also say like, well, John 1 in A Dance with Dragons or whatever.
I do it that way. I like to look at like the John point of view in like per the book. I'll mention the book.
Okay.
And then
So
we should actually, as we go forward, that's how we'll probably do it. Like, this is John.
Let us know.
Yeah, if we should change
in the comments.
Yeah.
What the proper formatting is of these chapters.
Right. I think most people, you see like Alt-Shift-X and some of those guys, like when they do it, they always put the abbreviated book title and then they'll put the characters of the POV character and then a number associated with it. Yeah. Because it can get super confusing.
It can get super confusing. I'm confused already.
I know. We're rolling on John 2. Oh my God. So in this chapter, basically, a quick summary here. Also, don't forget you can provide these. Any of our patrons can provide the summary, write it or read it, whatever you'd like to do. Make them funny. Thanks again, Tiffany, for providing that a couple weeks ago. John is about to depart for the Wall with his uncle, Benjen. Thank you. And he has to say goodbye to his brother, and he walks up to. He climbs the stairs to say his final goodbyes to Bran, and he is met with Catelyn Stark. And it is very awkward, and he is able to say his goodbyes, and he has a little bit of it's a little edgy, confrontational meeting between Catelyn and John. So there's your summary. Let's dive into some of these details, though. So do you have like a big takeaway from this or anything that was super monumental?
So both of mine are kind of in the second part of this chapter. Now this chapter is like 5 pages. It's really, really short. So after John meets with Catelyn is where he then goes and gives Arya her own needle, I suppose, is kind of the second part. But of the first part, Catelyn is, and we see this later in Catelyn's, I think it's her POV chapter where she's with Bran and, she's like trying to nurse him back to health. And I believe it's where the assassin comes in.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in that chapter, you get a lot of like Maester Luwin and Robb and people coming saying like, hey, it's okay. Cause I believe Robb is standing there and then they see a fire and then he leaves. And then that's when she's attacked. And the guy's like, you're not supposed to be here. So if having read that chapter and then coming back to this one, you really see just how kind of crazy she is about Bran, and rightfully so. And maybe that's even more so why she's so harsh to John in this chapter, when you get to see her inside look as to how she's just like, she's going to stay with him like Bran day and night, 'cause Bran's her special boy.
Yeah. Yep. Well, my big, I like that. My big takeaway was the fact that she, for once, finally called him John.
Yeah.
And he says, yes. And she says, it should have been you.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, like, it's just, it's crazy. And that to me just sort of shows you, again, getting back to Lady Stoneheart, what she is willing to do.
Here we go again.
You know, she is willing. She is ruthless when it comes to, you know, like you've said it before, family, duty, honor. You know, like what she's willing to sacrifice, who she's willing to sacrifice, and the extent to which she's willing to go to protect her family.
Yeah,
it's pretty extreme. It tells you a lot about her.
Now here we go. So I have this section highlighted. Now we're about to get down, as Lord Adam Parker told me on the Facebook the other day. He loves it when we go down these rabbit holes.
Yeah.
So I have kind of a rabbit hole here for us for this first part of this chapter.
Okay.
I wanted him to stay here with me, Lady Stark said softly. Jon watched her wary. She was not even looking at him, she was talking to him. But for a part of it, for a part of her, it was as though he was not even in the room. I prayed for it, she said dully. He was my special boy. I went to the sept and prayed 7 times to the 7 faces of God that Ned would change his mind and leave him here with me. Sometimes prayers are answered.
Yeah.
And then there is a chapter, I believe it's in A Clash of Kings, isn't it? Where she's talking to, I can't remember who she's talking to, but she's talking about how when Jon was a baby and sick and she was praying,
right,
that originally she had kind of prayed that they would just take Jon away.
Right.
Just take him away. But then he got sick and she kind of changed her mind, so she prayed that he would live.
Right.
Now, this hasn't happened in the books yet, but it has happened in the show.
Yeah.
You have Melisandre, who kind of goes through the whole ordeal with Stannis, where she thinks he's the Lord of Light, kind of realizes he's not, and she's beginning to kind of question R'hllor and like her faith.
Yep.
And so then you have Melisandre come in, pray for Jon, and you know she's even like, I don't know if I can do it, because this is after she's like burned Shireen,
right?
But then the prayers again are answered.
They're answered. Yeah.
So just
yeah.
Is this Acre foreshadowing maybe to that?
Right.
Or is there something, again, even further down the line that we haven't seen yet?
Yeah, because it is
or
kind
is this just a weird connection I'm making to something?
No, it's a subtle reference, right, to prayers being answered, right? And, you know, I'm guessing that she was praying to the 7 originally when she prayed that, you know, that Jon, I mean, I don't know. Did she pray that he would be taken away, or did she just say she wished he would be taken away?
Maybe she said she.
And then look that up for a second, because then he gets sick, right?
Right.
And then she does pray to the gods to let him live. You know, and she was. It's almost like one of those things where, I think she does actually pray that that the boy be taken away. That she just couldn't bear, you know.
Okay, I looked it up here. So that scene is actually exclusive to the show. That doesn't happen in the books.
It doesn't happen in the books?
Yeah.
Okay. Man, that's pretty epic though. That's a pretty cool, like,
yeah,
you know, because I mean, here she's just cold-hearted in this. I mean, she's just like, that's weird. Then that's crazy. I kind of like the way the show does it. Then
I know. See, that's one thing when you get into
that.
See, that's where when the other week when we had been talking about the conversation about like Robert and Cersei having that conversation about perhaps their first kid. That whole conversation doesn't even happen in the books.
Yeah, and you're right. But isn't it awesome?
Yeah, that's one thing.
It's one of those things like the showisms, if you want to call them movieisms, like are super. Like those are neat. I like those additions. But
because sometimes I feel like it kind of. Now, obviously, there's stuff that the show does way later, like not including Lady Stoneheart. I mean, stuff where it's just different,
right? Yeah.
But a lot of this other stuff, I feel like sometimes I kind of like because it adds depth, like extra stuff that happens only in the show,
right?
Where it's more of a scene, is like, well, the show needs to build this character that way, and so I don't know. You're right. I kind of like it. Yeah,
because I was wondering, I was struggling with what you said there about Catelyn. You know, then her prayers, because I was like, doesn't that happen right here with, like when did that happen in the show?
I think
that might have been actually earlier. I thought it was like right around this time. I don't know, I can't remember. But anywho, doesn't matter. It's neat, and it's one of those things where, you know, that's what you want. You want the show to kind of improve upon.
I think when it happens in the show, I almost feel like I feel like it's when she goes down to meet with Renly. And remember, like, because then, like, they do the black magic, because I believe Catelyn's standing right there when the black magic takes Renly, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Or she's like, or Brienne is there. Brienne of Tarth is there.
Both,
Maybe
yep.
Catelyn was there or something, because she's saying that, and then she says like, who was the baby you prayed for? And she says Jon Snow, and then it switches and shows Jon at the wall or something.
Okay.
Like that.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So anyways,
Anyway,
you know,
back to the chapter. Yeah.
In this one, just cold as all get out, and that's a neat little connection about prayers being answered. But she is, you know, I mean, talk about. I mean, he just comes upstairs to. I'm sure. Did he know Catelyn was up here?
Oh, I'm sure he did.
Yeah, and so he's got to go up and sort of say goodbye to, you know, his brother, and I think that's good for him, and like staying and like kind of putting his foot down and saying, you know,
Call the guards.
Call him. Yeah. Like, I mean, I'm gonna say goodbye to my brother. You know, I mean.
Yeah, and then right after where Catelyn says prayers are answered, Jon did not know what to say. It wasn't your fault, he managed after an awkward silence. Her eyes found him. They were full of poison. Mm-hmm. I need none of your absolution, bastard.
Yeah.
And then this is where he basically leaves, and she says it should have been you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So it's a heartfelt little moment where he goes over and he's talking to, you know, his younger brother, and yeah, you would think in this moment, I'm trying to get inside of her head, why, you know, why is this making her, she's just angry in general.
She's angry.
Yeah. And so, you know, I mean, maybe if it would have been like him saying goodbye to go to the wall, she'd probably been like, okay, cool, it's fine. And Saul like had a soft, but she's just really upset. This is her favorite son.
This is her favorite son, and Ned has been sent to, Ned's been sent to
King's
Landing, and here's another thing where here's another difference. Now this is a flat out difference in the show and the book. In the show, and we're going to be doing our by the way, our show book comparison for the Patreon people. I believe this weekend is when it's going to go up.
Yep.
In the show, where Ned, it's like chapter 2 Catelyn, right? So then the show, Ned is saying, or in the book, excuse me, Ned's like, I don't want to go, I'll refuse him, and Catelyn's saying, no, you have to. Well, it's the total opposite in the show. In the show, Catelyn's like, I don't want him to take you. I don't want,
right.
And so that's where you kind of another thing where you see that kind of idea of just how much it's family first,
right?
Family, duty, honor. So it could be a part of that too. That like is that she's losing Bran and Arya and Sansa and Ned. She's losing half of her family.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, so it's a tough little situation. It's neat here some of the goodbyes though, because this is a big, like it's a small chapter, but these goodbye chapters, it's like,
right.
This is the last word some of them speak to one another. You know what I mean? So when he's talking, he comes back. He comes out of the after seeing Bran. He's now out in the yard, and he sees Robb shouting commands, etc. And he says, Uncle Benjamin's been looking for you. He wanted to leave about an hour ago. And John's just like, it's harder than I thought, to leave, or to say goodbye. And Robb says the same thing. And he says, did you see him? John nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He's not going to die, Robb said. I know it. And then this is great, John. You Starks are hard to kill. So
now here we go.
Yeah. Yeah. What? Rabbit hole?
Yeah. Here we go down another rabbit hole. Here, you Starks are hard to kill. Is this because he's a bastard and he's trying to say it? But I feel like John's relationship with Robb is a lot closer.
Yeah.
So I don't know if John. It's foreshadowing.
Well, yeah, it's a Targaryen saying that a Stark is hard to kill. I mean,
well, he's half Targaryen, half Stark.
Just playing,
theoretically,
right? Yeah, we don't know.
At least in the show.
I don't, anymore. I'm really starting to kind of debate, R plus L equals J, just so we're clear. So anywho, they're saying their goodbyes. He's like, there's a few more things he needs to speak to Arya, as you said. So, let's see. Oh, this is neat. Robb, he knew something was wrong.
Right.
My mother,
she
was very kind. John told him. Robb is kind of relieved. Good. He smiled. The next time I see you, you'll be in all black. It's always my color. It was always my color. How long do you think it'll be? or how do you think it'll be? You know.
Yeah.
So let's see. Then they move on, say their farewells. They hug. You know, tells him to take care. So take care of Bran, and then he makes his way over to Arya. And this is a fun little scene. You got anything from this second?
Arya was in her room packing a polished ironwood chest.
Yeah, little connection.
The Ironwoods. Mm-hmm. Yeah, go play the Game of Thrones Telltale game. Iron from Ice. House Forrester.
Yeah.
Yeah. Chest was bigger than she was. Nymeria was helping. Arya would only have to point, and the wolf would bound across the room, snatch up some wisp of silk in her jaws, and fetch it back. But when she smelled ghost, she sat down on her haunches and yelped at him. Mm-hmm. So there's kind of a connection between some of the wolves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because later we get a lot of the Summer and Shaggy Dog kind of playing together, and Shaggy Dog's just like he's like super wild. He's all over the place. He's like injuring people, you know. Later, I believe when they're I believe it's in a Clash of Kings where they're kind of Bran and Rickon are playing with the Freys that are hanging out up there, and then Shaggy Dog injures Maester Lewin, and all this stuff. But here you have Nymeria, who immediately I think kind of like is submissive to Ghost.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. For sure. I think the rest of them might have been as well, maybe. Yeah. I don't know. Grey Wind maybe not, but Summer and Shaggy Dog. They seem to kind of know, don't they?
That Ghost is like, you don't mess with him.
Top dog, yeah. Top direwolf. Yeah, they do, and it's just it's neat the connection that they have. They kind of embody, you know, what their owner, right? Who they're Stark, you know. Right.
Or, you know, that Ghost is even more powerful because he's being warged by Bloodraven. I mean, let's just rabbit hole it again. Yeah, I know. So Nymeria is helping her, you know, put her clothes away. Septa Mordain, you know, had said, like, gotta redo it again. She's just like, it's fun. It's fun to kind of read Arya's, you know, she just can't do anything right. You know, she's not meant to be a little, you know, like a lady or a, you know, princess of any kind or what have you. So they're packing up, and he has a present. Her face lit up. You could call it that. Close the door. Nymeria here, guard. She left the wolf there to warn of intruders and closed the door. By then, Jon had pulled off the rags he'd wrapped it in, and he held it out to her. Arya's eyes went wide. Dark eyes like his. He just keeps mentioning that, you know? I know, the eye color.
Right? It's, you know, a sword, she said, in a small, hushed breath. And, you know, they pull it out, and he kind of goes over, you know, that it's not a toy. She needs to be careful with it. You know, they make a couple of jokes about the sword's edge and things. It's skinny like she is, you know, so just neat. It's a good gesture by, you know, her half brother / cousin. I don't know. You know, that, you know, this is her sword. And, so she has to name it though, doesn't she? I think that was one of my that was like my second major connection. Takeaway was that these swords have names, you know, and, what could just how important it is that she gives it a name and that it's hers, you know, and it's something that she identifies with later. Like when she starts to kind of lose her identity or has to forsake who she is, it's something that really means a lot to her. It's this token that sort of, I don't know, brings her back to who, you know. Yeah.
And there's and so that I have one thing, but we can kind of skip and come back to it because it focuses a little more, I guess, on Arya here. But so they're talking. Jon says, like, you'll find someone to practice with. You know, until you find a partner, just watch how they fight in the yard, run, hide, make yourself strong, and whatever. Hold on, run and hide. Which again, interesting. Yeah. That's basically Arya the entire second book. Arya knew what was coming next. They said it together. Don't tell Sansa. Right. And then they have another thing like that where they're talking about every good sword has a name. Can you guess what it is? It's your favorite thing. So Jon names her sword, but I think he kind of lets her name it, but she like kind of goes with it. Yeah. He they kind of know. Arya seemed puzzled at first, and then they said it together. Needle. So yeah, just kind of interesting here. So
yeah, that is awesome. It's just a really good back and forth. Shows how much they really, get along, and it's just a nice sort of farewell. So, I can't wait to see hopefully their reunion in the book.
Yeah. So I will say I watched a video. I believe it's called like Scologram. It's this guy, I've referenced him before. He does. I think he's like the biggest on YouTube who does this, where he just like breaks down like medieval weapons and all of these kinds of things. And he does one video on like the weapons of Game of Thrones and like would they, do they make sense? And he's like, yeah, for the most part, a lot of them make sense. Like Longclaw is just, a sword with a pommel, so there's really nothing different about it. Because a lot of these times you'll see fantasy weapons which are just like super ridiculous, but Game of Thrones keeps them pretty. Yeah. And so he's talking, when he talks about needle, he's like, needle is more of like a rapier type of weapon, where like it really is just, you really would just use it for stabbing. Like slicing it probably would do little to no damage because it's so thin,
right?
And so it's just interesting that is it's not just like a sword, right? It is specifically kind of like a rapier. So the only thing she could really do is stab people.
Well, and it's neat that the First Sword of Braavos is the way in which he guides and instructs her is totally meant to be that type of sword play. You know?
Speaking of which, let me just pull up my line here. Girls don't shave, Arya said. Maybe they should. Have you ever seen the Septa's legs? She giggled at him. It's so skinny. So are you, John told her. I had Micken make this special. The Braavos use swords like this in Pinto and Myr and the other free cities. It won't hack a man's head off, but you can poke him full of holes if you're fast enough. So immediately, in this first Arya chapter, we're already hearing about Braavos and the free cities. And then, of course, later, Arya practices with Syrio Farrell, right? Who is from Braavos, and then she meets Jack and Hagar, Braavos, and the Free Cities, where she, later trains at the House of Black and White.
There you go.
And so it's just, this foreshadowing we get here in these little lines.
I know, it's crazy. It's just laced with all sorts of connections to later on and stuff. So when you go back and look at it, it's just like wow, it's really cool. One thing I wanted to mention as we wrap this up here. I've always been a big fan of Arya, and I know some people don't like her, like Sir Matt.
It's not. I like her a lot more in the books, and actually, I've been rewatching a lot of just clips from the show. Yeah, and this is something we kind of talked about before. I believe it was on a Follow Up Friday or a Raven. In that, in season 7, the last season, when everyone's coming together, it just seems awkward. Yeah, and so I like Arya in the show. But man, some of those scenes in the last season were so awkward. Sure. And I think it's just lately it's just been like a bad taste. I don't know. Yeah, you just didn't like the Arya Sansa stuff. But I think going back to it, I've come back off of it a little bit because I almost feel like maybe that because it happens much more. And some people were saying, hey, and I believe we even kind of referenced this too, is that none of these actors ever really worked together. Sure. But I also have a feeling that just having rewatched a lot of that season, if I'm had to guess, I'm gonna guess that some of the show creator, when they're doing the script reads and stuff, initially they were kind of like the tone of this season should be we have all of these totally different clashing personalities and people coming together. It should feel awkward. Yep, and I was gonna say that. So they were not sisters that truly they hadn't. They didn't like each other as kids, and then they
loved each other, but not they hadn't grown to be best friends.
They go off on totally different. Totally different. Right. Totally different things. Right. And so so I think that maybe that's why I just some of that was maybe a little bit intentional. I think the reason I've always liked Arya from the get go though is this. Where's the line here where she showers him with kisses and she's just hugging him. She's so just loves Jon, and so that immediately I was like, well. There's my second favorite character. You know what I mean? Yeah. Because she loves him that much. People's first favorite character. Yeah, I know. She's so cool. I mean, she's cool, and she's this warrior, princess warrior lady. It's just it's cool. So I don't know. Just wanted to kind of throw that out. That's why I've always really kind of liked her. Yeah. Just because of her association with Jon. The thing about it is that there's just so many good characters. Yeah. That I just she gets kind of just buried in the list of characters that I like. So it's not she's not my least favorite. No, character. Yeah. She's just not in my top 5 or 10. or 15.
And
or
her, well, yeah, okay. It's just interesting. Her story arc is interesting. It feels really different. It's different. So,
yeah.
Anywho, it helps us explore Essos, and it brings all that free city piece back into it with Daenerys as well. So, okay, I think that's it. Actually, our cool connections this week are really tied to the World of Ice and Fire, Aegon's Conquest. So we'll kind of save that, and we're going to dive into the Maester study.
Yeah, here we go.
Jiminy Christmas. Okay. So I think one of the first things I wanted to read from this, and this is again kind of a summary with maybe some stopping points where we will, talk about what we liked about it, give a little commentary here. But the first thing I wanted to read was, I think this is directly from the book. At its apex, Valyria was the greatest city in the known world, the center of civilization. Within its shining walls, 20 rival houses vied for power and glory in court and council, rising and falling in an endless, subtle, oft savage struggle for dominance. Some saw the leaving as cowardice. Now, that piece is talking about, I just kind of threw that mark in there so I didn't forget this. The Targaryen house wasn't really one of the, the top tier
absolutely.
houses. It was still I would call it an upper to mid, tiered, like, not even really. Well,
the Targaryens were far from the most powerful of dragon lords, and their rivals saw their flight to Dragonstone as an act of surrender.
Right. Yeah, and almost called them kind of like, saw it as kind of cowardly, right? But is it, how do you say his name? Aenir?
Aenir, yeah.
Aenir's maiden daughter, Daenys,
yeah.
I think, known forever afterward as Daenys the Dreamer, had foreseen the destruction of Valyria by fire. And when the doom came 12 years later, the Targaryens were the only dragon lords to survive. So again, it was neat. They are dragon lords, and so yeah, they survive because of this. And we see this in the Dunk and Egg series, the Green Dreams, and the things that they foresee that may come to pass. And some of them seem to have more, I think in the Dunk and Egg series, Egg's brother was drowning his dreams in a lot of, like, I think his recall of what was happening was all drowned by, all the alcohol and stuff he was drinking.
Right, absolutely.
So I think he might have had clearer visions, but he didn't want to. He didn't want to know. It was a burden and a curse, right? Whereas, like, it sounds like if you weren't trying to get rid of that, air quote here, gift, then if you're like Bloodraven and you're like, Daenys the Dreamer, then you maybe really can foresee some events to come. So clearly she did, and they, took off out of there. So, I mean, they took their whole household, everything, and kind of got out of there. So anyways, I thought that was kind of neat just to mention, but when they are in on Dragonstone, and you just jump in here whenever you want, Matt, but they're still looking east, not necessarily west.
Yeah, we kind of talked about this a little bit last week, how it kind of, the Doom of Valyria kind of ends with leading into Aegon, and I still find that so bizarre because they're on Dragonstone for what I believe like 200 years before Aegon's conquest and the Doom of Valyria. They said it was a while.
Wow, I can't remember. It's like 100. Ooh, they did say it though.
I have
in the text.
I have the chapter pulled up here so I can.
Yeah, I'll open my book too. But because I remember I was trying to calculate the number of years between the first, Anar Targaryens, being the first one there, and then it talks about his line a little bit, and who came there. So again, this is the
the isle that would come to Dragonstone some 200 years before the Doom. So they it's like an outpost. That the Targaryens had taken over.
Okay. Yeah. So they get there 12 years before the Doom of Valyria, which they're calling. Let's see. So this says 12 years before the Doom of Valyria, which is 114 BC, before the conquest.
And I will say, or go ahead, and then I'll reference something after you.
Well, no, it just so that's why I said like 100 something. I wasn't sure. So 12 years before the Doom of Valyria, 114 BC, Aenir Targaryen sold his holdings in the freehold lands of the Long Summer and moved all of his wives' wealth, slaves, dragons, and siblings of kin, and children to Dragonstone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think it's funny at the very beginning of this. Might be slightly different because I'm using like the ebook, and so it's kind of set up just a little bit different, where it talks about like the different maesters and like how, like, again, in this World of Ice and Fire book, they reference it. This is another reference here, how they talk about how this is referenced by maesters,
right,
and things like that. So you still can't look at this book at like 100% accuracy.
Yes. Yeah.
Which is just interesting. And then like they kind of talk about how they talk about the dating a little bit, and they talk about how it's like disputed, and that Aegon's conquest may have actually been taken place like 1 or 2 BC, and it's just kind of interesting if you think about like our dating system like before Christ, and then some people reference and say AD as after death, which is incorrect, which is Anno Domini, which means, I believe, is Latin for like in the year of our Lord or something like that. Yeah. Where actually like Jesus may have actually been born in like 1 or 2 BC,
right?
Which just like depending on the way it is. But in this, I believe the way it is set up is that the AC is after the conquest, so there is actually this like like 2 or 3 year span, which is just not accounted for.
Yeah. So what's interesting is they believe most of what we hear after the conquest. The dates that we hear after this point, there is a 1 to 2 year sort of like
during the conquest, like,
during the conquest. But they say at the end of this chapter that the maesters in Old Town win, because Aegon has 2 coronations, right? His first one is right away, and it's like, do you call the crowning of like a couple of those Blackwater Bay houses? Is that the start, or is it when he's crowned, at Old Town? They say since the maesters were there.
Yeah, right here. Even the start date is a matter of some misconception. Many assume wrongly that the reign of King Aegon I Targaryen began the day he landed at the mouth of Blackwater Rush beneath the 3 hills where the city of King's Landing eventually stood. Not so. The day of Aegon's landing was celebrated by the king and his descendants, but the Conqueror actually dated the start of his reign from the day he was crowned and anointed in the starry sept of Old Town by the High Septim of the Faith. This coronation took place 2 years after Aegon's landing, well after all 3 of the major battles of the Wars of the Conquest had been fought and won. Thus, it can be seen that most of Aegon's actual conquering took place from 2 to 1 BC before conquest.
Before conquest, yeah. So that term conquest, it's like they are talking when he is the maesters too, since they were there, and this is in Old Town. They believe they're the ones who kind of write the history, right? So they're the ones who are going to say that, we saw this, they were there, and that's when they start the record books, based upon after his conquest of the 6 kingdoms.
Yeah.
So anyways, let me go back up here to some of my notes and kind of see where I want to jump into this with the... Okay, so it talks about some of the allies to House Targaryen. House Valerian,
I think.
Valerian, yeah. And the Celtigars of Claw Island. So they're kind of allies to House Targaryen.
And those are just, I believe, kind of the ones that are like right around Dragonstone.
Right. They're right. And I actually think I could be wrong about this, but just from what I was trying to gather here, like that House Valerian might have actually came with the Targaryens, like might have been like a lesser group or whatever. They actually are related to the Targaryens in some way. Because like you said,
theirs is it's a seahorse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But anyways, they were kind of there, like you had said, it's either 117 to 200 years where the Targaryens are on Dragonstone. So you would imagine they made some alliances around there, right?
Yeah. House Valerian is an ancient and proud house with the blood of old Valyria in its veins. The Valerians left Valyria before the Targaryens and settled on the island of Driftmark in the Narrow Sea. So this is another thing you got to think about is... Remember, the First Men came over, the Andals came over, and then the Valyrians. Obviously, if there's Valyrian weapons and stuff coming over, a lot of Valyrian descendants are over here too. So
and that's one of those the distinguish between like the Dragon Lords and then House Valerian, which was like maybe a smaller house. It wasn't necessarily one of those power. Not that again, not that the Targaryens were any powerhouse, but they kind of distinguished them as like dragon lords.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, but yeah, you're right. The Dragonstone, right south, southwest is Driftmark, and that's where they were at. Also, Macy's Hook there was allied to them, as well as Claw Island, which is to the north of Dragonstone.
Right.
So all of those are already, that's like their bannermen, if you want to call them that, right? For lack of a better term. So anywho, this is interesting. 5 dragons came to Dragonstone, and Balerion is the only one who actually, of the ones that came from the Freehold, is like survives, is still there, right?
Yeah, Balerion is actually the going to be our cool connection.
Mm-hmm.
So we can wait and kind of do it, or we can kind of...
We can wait. We can come back to it. Because really, the only thing I have here to mention is that the 2 dragons that his sisters ride are actually born there on Dragonstone.
Yeah.
So, which was interesting. So
Stormborn.
Yep.
Well, they're not Stormborn. They're just born on Dragonstone.
Right.
But
so 5 dragons came to Dragonstone. Balerion. Okay, cool. So now it starts to kind of talk about the current layout of Westeros at the time, and so it's 7 quarrelsome kingdoms, right? And you've got they talk about Argilac, the Arrogant, the Storm King, House Durrandon, and
is it Durrandon or is it Durrandon? I don't know.
Durrandon, yeah. I mean, super neat. And this guy is he's arrogant, but he's also like battle worn. He's got a lot of good victories under his belt. He's kind of, he has this feud with Harren the Black, right, of House Hor. So who is the king of the Isles and the Rivers. So again, this Ironborn Harren, is in control of the Riverlands this time. And so Argilac is actually, it calls him, Argilac the Arrogant, and I almost like I kind of get it, but he's a badass character.
Oh, I know.
I mean, he's actually pretty cool.
A lot of the characters we learn about in this chapter are pretty sick.
Yeah, but I mean, like of them, like he seems one who I'm like, I kind of like, I think you have a lot of respect for him, even though, just in his title calling him arrogant, I don't know. That's what everybody else is calling him. I mean, he's won a lot of victories, and he's proved himself. He's older now. He's much older, and he's one of the kings. Yeah, one of the 7 kings. So, but anyways, there's that whole bit there with, and then you've got Harren the Black, as I said, is another king, and these 2 are kind of warring against one another. So what I have in my notes, I guess, Matt, is that he's Argilac tries to make an alliance, correct? Just with Aegon. And I don't know if they, because the first bit of conquering that happens, I kind of skipped over some of that. Do you have any notes on like the first little, because he kind of just conquers a couple lesser lords?
Yes. Sorry, guys. This chapter's huge, so we're gonna be kind of just shifting around here. Because I mean, he offers him. I believe he offers him one of his wives, doesn't he? And no king in Westeros, Black Harren, and no king in Westeros felt more threatened than Argilac, the Storm King, last of the Durrandon, an aging warrior whose only heir was his maiden daughter. Thus, it was King Argilac who reached out to the Targaryens on Dragonstone, offering Lord Aegon his daughter in marriage, with all the lands east of the God's Eye, from the Trident to Blackwater Rush, as her dowry. Aegon Targaryen spurned the Storm King's proposal. He already had 2 wives, which we'll get to them. And the dowry lands being offered had belonged to Harrenhal for more than a generation. They were not Argilac's to give. Plainly, the aging Storm King meant to establish Targaryens along the Blackwater as a buffer between his own lands and those of Harren the Black. The Lord of Dragonstone countered with his own offer. He would take the dowry lands being offered if Argilac would also cede Macy's Hook and the woods and plains from the Blackwater south to the river Wendwater and the headwaters of the Mander. The pact would be sealed by the marriage of King Argilac's daughter to Orys Baratheon, Lord Aegon's child, friend, and champion. These terms Argilac the Arrogant rejected angrily. Oris Baratheon was a base-born half-bastard to Lord Aegon, and it was whispered that the Storm King would not dishonor his daughter by giving her hand to a bastard. This very suggestion enraged him. Argilac had the hands of Aegon's envoy cut off and returned to him in a box. "These are the only hands of your bastard shall ever have of me," he wrote. Aegon made no reply. Instead, he summoned his friends, bannermen, and principal allies to attend him on Dragonstone. Their numbers were small. The Valyrians on Driftmark were sworn to House Targaryen, as were the Celtigars of Claw Isle. From Macy's Hook came Lord Bear Emmon of Sharp Point and Lord Macy of Stone Dance, both sworn to Storm's End, but with closer ties to Dragonstone. Lord Aegon and his sisters took counsel with them and vested their castle sept to pray to the Seven of Westeros as well, though they had never been before accounted as a pious man. On the seventh day, a cloud of ravens... Sorry, I'm just reading here. On the seventh day, a cloud of ravens burst from the towers of Dragonstone to bring Lord Aegon's word to the seven kingdoms of Westeros. To the seven kings they flew, the citadel of Old Town, to the lords both great and small, all carried the same message. From this day forth, there would be but one king in Westeros. Those who bent the knee to Aegon of House Targaryen would keep their lands and titles. Those who took up arms against him would be thrown down, humbled, and destroyed.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. Pretty big. I mean,
I really like that. I really like that one little thing there. Yeah, those who bent the knee.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. Well, and he's true to his word. You know, Aegon throughout this whole thing is true to the ravens that he sent out. You know, so people start to kind of catch on later on. Other kings are like, "Oh yeah, all right." Yeah. I mean, this guy was not joking around. You know, but he kind of has to start with Blackwater Bay, the Blackwater Rush there, and consolidating it. And so let me see here if I've got this backwards or not. But I think he does that pretty quickly, and then is able to. He has that first coronation, doesn't he? Or has he already had that once he sent these ravens out?
Hold on.
I don't think so. I think that might come later.
Yeah, I believe that comes just later. So what he does is he this is where he's basically said, I'm about to conquer Westeros, and he and his two sisters all take off in different directions. And so I believe it is after he takes the first place, basically where the what I believe is now known as the Crown Lands, is where he then comes back and establishes basically House Targaryen, and then the Westeros people see that sigil and him wearing a crown, and they say, okay, but then he still has a lot more conquering to do. Yeah,
and I think it's actually that he, he conquers a couple of these different houses in here, like Rosby, Stokeworth, Darkland, and he sets up Aegon's, what's it called? Aegon's Fort. Aegon Fort,
which later becomes King's Landing.
Right, becomes King's Landing, and so once he establishes that,
is when he establishes the fort.
That's when he sort of has his first coronation by his two sisters.
Yeah, right here. Just kind of sift through here. Having taken a dozen castles and secured the mouth of the Blackwater Rush on both sides of the river, he commanded the lords he had defeated to attend him. They then laid their swords at his feet, and Aegon raised them up and confirmed them and their lands and titles. So basically he says, no, I'm giving you your lands and titles back because you swore fealty. To his oldest supporters he gave new honors. Daemon Valerian, Lord of the Tides, was made Master of Ships in command of the royal fleet. Tristan Massey, Lord of Stone Dance, was named Master of Laws. Crispin Celtigar, Master of Coin, and Oris Baratheon he proclaimed to be my shield, my stalwart, and my strong hand. So basically where he's creating the hand of the king position. Thus Baratheon is reckoned by the Maesters the first king's hand. Heraldic banners had long been a tradition amongst the lords of Westeros, but had such never been used by the dragon lords of old Valyria. When Aegon's knights unfurled his great silken banner or battle standard with with a red three-headed dragon breathing fire upon a black field. The lords took it as a sign that he was now truly one of them, a worthy high king of Westeros. When Queen Visenya placed a Valyrian steel circlet studded with rubies on her brother's head, and Queen Rhaenys hailed him as Aegon, first of his name, king of all Westeros and shield of his people, the dragons roared, and the lights and Nords set up and the lords and knights, set up a cheer, but the small folk, the fishermen, and the field hands and good wives shouted loudest of all. Mm-hmm. The seven kings, the Aegon... And
that's important.
That is.
That's super important. That the small folk were the ones who were cheering him the most.
Mm-hmm. Because of this, because he's basically... He's saying, like, I'm going to... Like, if I'm... So this is like where you kind of get into... to look like at modern day wars and things like that. And this is something that Daenerys runs into later when Daenerys tries to take over like Slaver's Bay, and she's dealing with all that stuff. Like, we've always had it. We've always had slaves. And you kind of see this, like if you could look at, say, I don't know, the United States' involvement in the Middle East, where we go over and, they have these such long-rooted traditions and things like that. And regardless of whether they're right or wrong, when you just trying to instill something new does not always work.
Right.
So,
yeah.
No. So that's why here you have Aegon coming in. And I don't know if it doesn't say, but do you think that he did it because he realized this is how I'll gather them? Or do you think he just did it as like, well, we'll just do it. And then it worked so well. It was like, okay.
Well, I don't know. I think that's a good question. The idea is that he wanted to unite everyone right under one king. And these, it's like, look, guys, I don't want to live over in your keep, except I've got my own keep. I'm sitting on my own, King's Landing, right? Aegon Fort. And he knows you would need regional, governance or governors, right, to kind of take control and help, with the governing of the Seven Kingdoms, So, one thing I wanted to do before we get too far into this, though, is to talk quickly about the Aegon and his two sisters.
Yep.
Right.
Okay.
So he had two sisters, and he is supposed to marry Visenya, which he does, his eldest sister, and she's actually older. She's the oldest of the three.
Yeah, I have all that kind of pulled up here.
Yeah.
First, though, one quick thing, though. So this is just kind of talking about the Dragonstone and whatever. A common myth, this is before in the chapter, a common myth oft heard amongst the ignorant claims that Aegon Targaryen had never set foot upon the soil of Westeros until the day he set sail to conquer it. But this claim cannot be true. Years before the voyage, the painted table that had been carved and decorated in Lord Aegon's command, a massive slab of wood, some 50 feet long, carved in the shape of Westeros, and painted to show all the woods and rivers and towns and castles of the Seven Kingdoms. Plainly, Aegon's interest in Westeros long predated the events that drove him to war. So I just saw that point and just wanted to make sure that.
Yeah, that is really cool. I mean, that's he's been carving out this really super detailed map, and this, it's like a war room that he's created. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So here, so this is just kind of the difference. Sorry, I just want to make sure. Okay. Aegon Targaryen. Sorry. This would perhaps be an apt place to discuss the different characters of Aegon Targaryen and his sisters and queens. Visenya, eldest of the three siblings, was as much a warrior as Aegon himself, at comfortable in ringmail as in silk. She carried the Valyrian longsword, Dark Sister, big deal.
Yep. Oh yeah,
and was skilled in its use, having trained beside her brother since childhood. Though possessed all the silver, gold hair, and purple eyes of Valyria, hers was a harsh, austere beauty. Austere, yeah. Even those who loved her best found Visenya stern, serious, unforgiving, and some said that she played with poisons and dabbled in dark sorceries.
Rhaenys.
Rhaenys. Oh yeah, sorry. Rhaenys, youngest of the 3 Targaryens, was all her sister was not. Playful, curious, impulsive, given to flights of fancy, no true warrior. Rhaenys loved music, dancing, and poetry, and supported many a singer, mummer, and puppeteer. Yet it is said that Rhaenys spent more time on Dragonback than her brother and sister combined. For above all things, she loved to fly. She once was heard to say that before she died, she meant to fly Meraxes across the Somerset Sea to see what lay upon its western shores. Whilst no one had ever questioned Visenya's fealty to her brother/husband, Rhaenys surrounded herself with many young men, and it was whispered, even entertained some in her bedchambers on nights when Aegon and her was with her elder sister. Yet despite these rumors, observers at court could not fail to note that the king spent more nights with Rhaenys he spent 10 nights with Rhaenys for every night he spent with Visenya. Aegon Targaryen himself, strangely, was much an enigma to his contemporaries as to us. Armed with the Valyrian steel blade Blackfire, he was counted amongst the greatest warriors of his age, yet he took no pleasure in feats of arms and never rode in tourney or melee. His mount was Balerion, the Black Dread, but he flew only to battle, or to travel swiftly across land and sea. His commanding presence drew men to his banners, yet he had no close friends, with the exception of Orys Baratheon, the companion of his youth. Women were drawn to him, but Aegon remembered ever faithful to his sisters. As king, he put great trust in his small council and his sisters, leaving much to the day-to-day governance of the realm to them. Yet he did not hesitate to take command when he found it necessary. Though he dealt harshly with rebels and traitors, he was open-handed with former foes who bent the knee.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, and so when you look at those 3, characters there, and we're going to get more into once. I think like you said, the next chapter is basically his reign. Mm-hmm. We kind of talk about that. There's some interesting stuff. It's neat to note that his older sister might have been into sorcery and things like that, which is really neat. And his younger sister is sort of this free spirit, which I think we said earlier. He kind of marries for he's duty. He's sort of like honor bound or whatever. He's supposed to marry his eldest sister. Mm-hmm. And so he does do that. But then, and it wasn't completely unnormal or against, I don't know, custom or what have you, for him to take a second wife, that had been done before. Didn't happen often, I guess, but it wasn't like, okay, it wasn't really that big of a deal. So he has 2 wives, and he really takes Rhaenys because it's more of a lust thing. Like she's just, I think that's who he spent most of his time with. And I believe, I'm thinking ahead here, I think does he have more of his children with her? I think.
Oh, that's a good question.
I think he does, but we'll get there. I can't remember off the top of my head. Anyways, so it's really neat though. Just they're very 3 really different personalities. And they're loyal to one another. Family is super important. Keeping that bloodline, pure is important to them as well. So, yeah.
All right. Yes, he does. He has 1 child with Visenya and 2 children with Rhaenys.
Okay. Yeah, we'll get to the sons of. Oh yeah, actually, yeah, because I read the sons. Of the dragon. Yeah, it's all coming back now.
Yeah, Maegor and Aenys.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. That's gonna be lots of fun. We'll get into that. Okay, so after this sort of like gathering at Aegon Fort, they split up as Matt said, and they head in different directions. The 3 heads to this dragon head in different ways. So Rhaenys heads south with Orys Baratheon to face Argilac. Mm-hmm. and in the Stormlands, and Aegon himself is going to go. I think it's northwest to Harrenhal to face down Harren, and Visenya is going to go. She takes the fleet, so she goes with the Master of Ships, and they head up to the Vale. Right, they're going to head up that way, and basically, let's see here, another plug for. A really good source for you guys, Atlas of Fire, Atlas of Ice and Fire blog. This guy or gal, don't know, does an amazing job of breaking down the battles and what have you. So I'll kind of read a little bit of this, but Aegon actually is surprised by Harren's sons. They kind of come out of the woods and attack, take down 1,000 or so of his men, and then I think they had cover of night and cover of the forest, and so it was at dawn he was able to take Balerion to the sky and find him, and he was able to kill Harren's sons. So that was I think they win a battle at it's like the Battle of the Reeds. Battle of the Reeds, and in the Battle of the Wailing Willows is I think he suffers a defeat at the Wailing Willows, which kind of sapped up some of his strength, and then he's able to kind of rest though in the Riverlands a little bit. Oh, and what was neat, the reason he's able to rest is because Harren has tried to call the banners in the Riverlands there, and they really didn't rally to him, So there was some what the book calls vexations that sort of helped the Targaryens. Like when you call your banners and you consolidate, for example, down in Storm's End, pirates from the Stepstones end up coming over and kind of plaguing Argilac. So as Oars and Rhaenys are heading down there, it's they're getting plagued by that. There's some hill tribes or people who came out of like the hills, right? Ratings, right? That happened from Dorne. I think it was Dornish ratings that were happening to the south. So that's stuff that you've got to, like, you've consolidated, called your banners, but you got to send people back because you've got villages and towns getting raided. And then, Harren's big thing was that the Tullys, they just, they oppose him, actually. And so that gives Aegon the chance to kind of rest a little bit, So, so that's neat. Now, when Visenya goes north, I think it's the Battle of, it could be the Battle of Gulltown. They are actually, the Master of Ships is defeated and he's killed, and so they face a little bit of a defeat there. But then she's able to sweep in with her dragon, and we were watching an Alt Shift X video, and basically, the roll of the eye here is that whenever there's a defeat on a ground forces or even footing, bring in the dragon, and this is over. This party's over, type of thing. So now Ors Baratheon and Princess Rhaenys, when they march south on Storm's End, there's a lot that happens with this. This is a real kind of shows you how epic Ors Baratheon is as a commander, because you just heard that Rhaenys is not necessarily that big of a fighter. She's more of she's in the music, she's loyal to her family, she loves to fly her dragon, and probably like better than any of them at like flying and what have you, and raining down with some fire where needed. But let's see if I have it here. Atlas of Ice and Fire does a really good job of talking about how Ors kind of baits Argilac into attacking. Almost gets like makes him a little bit overconfident. It was rainy. Do you remember this part? It was like rainy. It was muddy.
Yeah, right here. Yeah. Thus Argilac the Arrogant led his knights against the Baratheon positions, but the slopes were steep and the rains had turned the ground soft and muddy. So the war horses straggled and foundered, and the charges lost all cohesion and momentum. Their Stormlands fared better when the Stormlanders fared better when they sent their spearmen up the hills on foot. Blinded by the rain, the invaders did not see them climbing until it was too late. And the wet bowstrings of the archers made their bows useless. One hill fell, then another, and then a third, and then a final charge of the Storm King and his knights broke through the Baratheon center, only to come upon Queen Rhaenys and Meraxes.
Yep, and there's this epic showdown here where Ors kind of makes his way to Argilac.
And then they fight basically one-on-one. Yeah. Stand aside, Baratheon commanded. He dismounted so as to meet the king on equal footing. He's talking to his men, and offered the Storm King one last chance to yield. Argilac cursed him instead, and so they fought. The old warrior king with his streaming white hair and Aegon's fierce black-bearded hand. Each man took a wound from the other, it is said, but in the end, the last of the Durrandon got his wish and died with a sword in his hand and a curse on his lips. The death of their king took all the heart out of the Stormlanders, and as the word spread that Argilac had fallen, his lords and knights threw down their swords and fled. For a few days, it was feared that Storm's End might suffer the same fate as Harrenhal, for Argilax's daughter, Argella, barred her gates at the approach of Orys Baratheon and the Targaryen host, and declared herself the Storm Queen. Rather than bend the knee, the defenders of Storm's End would die to the last man. She promised when Queen Rhaenys flew Meraxes into the castle to parley, "You may take my castle, but you will win only bones and blood and ashes," she announced. But the soldiers of the garrison proved less eager to die. That night, they raised a peace banner, threw open the castle gates, and delivered Lady Argella, gaggled, chained, and naked, to the camp of Orys Baratheon.
Right, and here's where I think, Orys is, again, I go back to Argilax being like this epic war hero who, you can call him arrogant, but I mean, he's defended his lands. Harren is more of the known for his cruelty. So I think if you were looking at the Seven Kingdoms right before the Conquest, it's like, this is a guy who won a lot of battles in his younger years. He's kind of got the Dorne to his south, and he's got Harren to his north. He's got a lot to contend with. I think they have a lot of respect for him, and Orys definitely sees that same trait in his daughter, and he clothes her. He takes her, speaks to her kindly, and even like when he reflects on the fight that he had with her father. Could you imagine? This guy's an old man. Could he have taken, Orys Baratheon in his younger days? Possibly. It's one of those great questions that you always ask about, like, Barristan Selmy in his prime. Could he take Jaime?
Barristan Selmy now. Okay.
Oh, I know. I know. Yeah, no. But it's the questions that you ask, right? Could Ned Stark? You always ask about the question in their prime. Who could they take? But this is one of those guys who was like Barristan Selmy, like even late in age. After they talked about his dark mane of hair had turned, snow white. That he is still is forced to be reckoned with, and he's out there fighting. I just think that's just super cool. So he ends up taking the words. I mean, he must really, Orys must really had some mutual respect, don't you think, for this house?
And that was one thing. That I kept finding weird, because when we were talking about like Storm's End and some of these other things in the past couple episodes, and I would click on like House Durandon, and I was like, okay, like reading about this, and I was like, wait, why is their sigil the same as the Baratheon sigil?
Right.
Yeah, and it's because the Baratheons didn't really have a sigil. They just, because they're kind of like a bastard house. Right. Well, which is kind of interesting, because now the only surviving, I guess, at least in the show, possibly in the books, but is Gendry, who is also a bastard.
Right. There's a theme of bastardry like throughout the Baratheon line or whatever, which is pretty neat. But actually, Argilax's line is able to continue through his conqueror Orys, taking his daughter. And I think he just admired like her fight, that she was going to hold up there and like, it's over, the battle's over. But to see her still like, I'll die defending here, because that's just, it was the honor or whatever, whether that is an honorable thing or not is the question. But I think he saw it as such and really admired it. So I don't know. I thought that was so cool, actually. It's one of the cooler parts of this. It's like a huge victory, and it really, I get that Rhaenys and her dragon are a big player in this, but they were rendered a little bit ineffective because of the mud, and the rain. Right? He wasn't. Rhaenys wasn't able to take flight during that battle, so that's pretty huge. I get that Orys also had the high ground, I believe, which if you know anything about Star Wars, it's super important to have the high ground. Sorry. So anyways, just a cool battle, and one that I want to take a deeper look at later. Just think it's really neat. Yeah. So
and then and then their line does continue. They have some kids. One Davos Baratheon, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, a couple of things that we talked about the vexations to these different kings and what was happening. Again, the Tullys, I said, they're rising against Harren. There's a conversation between Harren and Aegon. Harren decides, he's got Harrenhal, this keep at the Isle of Faces, that he is going to hold up in. So I kind of jumped ahead to the battle that I thought was neat, but we have to go back to see what happened with Aegon. And to finish up that last thought, Aegon is on a different front.
Yeah.
He owes a lot. He owes that whole victory.
Everybody kind of takes their own. There's 4, essentially. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's like Or's really is the commander there, and like he uses Rhaenys and her dragon as a pawn in that, and it sets it up, sets a nice little trap for that, kind of baits them in, and then they are faced with a dragon on the ground. I think she's on the ground, fighting and stuff. So now back to Harren though. And this conversation that takes place, Aegon shows up after a couple of these different battles, and they brought with them, I think, Maester, as they said, so like they actually have the conversation. So let's see if I can find it real quick. Oh, okay. Each king had his banner bearer and his Maester in attendance, so the words that they exchanged are still remembered. And this is just an epic conversation, and it's worth kind of reading. And it kind of shows a lot about these two individuals and who Aegon was and how confident he should have been and that he had these dragons. And also, a side note here, interesting that no one else before Aegon thought to conquer Westeros. They had they had 5 dragons and they didn't use them, to the point where I just think that's interesting, but we can talk more about that later. So Aegon says, "Yield now, and you may remain as the Lord of the Iron Islands." And he only says Iron Islands, because Tullys are already in rebellion, trying to take back the Riverlands. Because this guy is Ironborn, isn't he? I believe he's Ironborn, from the Iron Islands. Yield now, and your sons will live to rule after you. I have 8,000 men outside your walls. Harren says, "What is outside my walls is no concern to me. Those walls are strong and thick, but not so high as to keep out dragons. Dragons fly. I built in stone," said Harren. "Stone does not burn." To which Aegon said, "When the sun sets, your line shall end." You talk about a period at the end of a sentence. Your line shall end. It's a super epic conversation, and it's one of those things that when we think about like the show and what may come, that'd be super cool to kind of see play out in HBO, on the TV.
Oh, I know. Well, basically right here, it said that Harren spat and then returns to his castle, and then he sends all these people up to all right, get ready to defend this castle. And Harrenhal, by the way, is like enormous.
Oh yeah,
it is a huge castle. It's probably almost too big, to be completely honest. As the last light of the sun faded, Black Harren's men stared into the gathering darkness, clutching their spears and crossbows. When no dragon appeared, some had thought that Aegon's threats had been hollow. But Aegon Targaryen took Balerion up high through the clouds, up and up, until the dragon was no bigger than a fly upon the moon.
Wow!
Only then did he descend well inside the castle walls on wings as black as pitch. Balerion plunged through the night, and when the great towers of Harrenhal appeared beneath him, the dragon roared his fury and bathed them in black fire, shot through with swirls of red. Stone does not burn, Harren had boasted, but his castle was not made of stone alone. Wood and wool, hemp and straw, bread and salted beef and grain all took fire. Nor were Harren's iron men made of stone. Smoking, screaming, shouted in flames, they ran across the yards and tumbled from the white walks to die upon the ground below. And even stone will crack and melt if the fire is hot enough. The river lords outside the castle walls said later that the towers of Harrenhal glowed red against the night like 5 great candles, and like candles they began to twist and melt, and as runnels of molten stone ran down their sides.
Yeah.
Harren and his last sons died in the fires that engulfed his monstrous fortress that night.
Right. And Edmund Tully is then
basically
pledges
the
sword.
The next day, outside the smoking ruins of Harrenhal, King Aegon accepted the oath and fealty from Edmund Tully, Lord of Riverrun, and named him Lord Paramount of the Tried-Out. The other river lords did homage as well, and Aegon as king, and to Edmund Tully as their liege lord.
Yeah.
And then right here, while the ashes had cooled enough to allow men to enter the castle safely, the swords of the fallen, many shattered or melted or twisted into ribbons of steel by Dragonfall, were gathered up and sent back to the Aegon fort in wagons, which, is basically what's used to create the Iron Throne.
Right, yeah. One thing I forgot to kind of mention, there were a couple players here in of these kings who were trying to make alliances with Aegon, and trying to pledge their daughters, as Argilac did, and then you get into, because the next, we've got 2 kingdoms essentially they're conquered now,
right?
And
you have I guess you can kind of consider 3 if you consider like what the crown lands, which is basically, I think really the crown lands is just kind of like the Baratheons just kind of get that, because I believe that was part of the crown land, or the what you would call the storm lands originally.
Yeah. So but we've got these 2 kings conquered.
2 of the 7, yeah.
And
well, no, 3 now are conquered. Or excuse me, of the 7 kingdoms, yeah. So 2, you're correct. Sorry.
2, yeah, but we're getting there. I mean, because he sets his sights right for.
It's not. It's. I believe it's 9 when like the show starts. Like at chapter 1, there's essentially, if you consider 9, there's like 9 great houses, because it gets kind of turned into it. Yeah.
Yeah, and some of those places are like a part of another, lords, wardens.
Yeah. If you look at it today, it's 7 kingdoms, but there's 9 essentially great houses. So it's,
so with both the Riverlands and the Stormlands now under the control of Aegon the Dragon and his allies, the remaining kings of Westeros saw plainly that their own turns were coming. So this is where King Torrhen, calls his banners. He's getting ready. You've got a couple over the Queen Shara. So Queen Shara is in Queen Shara Aaron is at the Eyrie in the Vale, and this is kind of neat. She actually tries to, I guess she was super beautiful, very, very fair. She's the Queen Regent though.
Yeah, she has a son. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So do we know what really happened to her her husband, or it might have there? Yeah, if you look into that a little bit, there might have been something there. But she sends a portrait of herself to try to sway Aegon into marrying her, or provided that her son Ronald is named as his heir, because at the time Aegon doesn't have any sons.
Well, because Ronald Arryn is actually the king of the Vale.
Yes.
Shara Arryn.
That's the queen.
Unknown. It's unknown.
Regent. Yeah, that's what I thought. It doesn't really say. So anyways, so that piece we'll put that on hold. So that I think is one of the second to last kingdoms that is visited, because now we kind of switch over to the 2 great Western kings, and they make this common alliance. So you've got Highgarden, which is ruled by House Gardner, yeah, King of the Reach. And they make an alliance with House Lannister, King of the Rock, and they get together 55,000 strong. One
of the it says commanded the mightiest host ever seen in Westeros. Right.
Yeah. So this is pretty epic here. This host, and the battle scene itself here, I think there's probably too much to read, so we'll kind of summarize some of it. But this is a big chunk of the chapter. The Field of Fire is what this battle is known as, the Field of Fire, and they say it's arguably Aegon's greatest victory, and they say that because I think the last victory that was super huge was won by Ors Baratheon. That's why I think that's such a big deal that he was able to do that on his own.
They had 5 men for every one of Aegon's, it seemed, and the disparity in lords and knights was even greater. But as we'll get to here, this is kind of the problem with this battle. And the land was wide and open, all grass and wheat as far as the eye could see, ideal for heavy horse. Aegon Targaryen did not command the high ground as Ord Baratheon had at the last storm. The ground was firm, not muddy, nor were they troubled by rain. The day was cloudless, though windy. There had been no rain for more than a fortnight. which sounds like it's going to be a problem, Sir Ezra.
Yeah, it does. So let's look at some of the commanders of this. You've got King Aegon, right, and Queen Visenya, Queen Rhaenys, John. They say Lord John Mooten is there. So just some of the people that were big players on House Targaryen, and then the commanders under House Gardner and House Lannister. You've got King Morn Gardner, and then King Loren Lannister, Prince Edmund Gardner, which is important because like House Gardner is like all there. So you kind of wonder what happened to House Gardner.
Right.
Well, they all were there on the battlefield, and really, at the end of this battle, the survivors, people who did serve, it's just depending on where you're at.
Yeah, great. This is where some of the great houses get kind of set up.
Right. And then Lord Oakheart is there as well. And so let's see, let's get in here. So Aegon's strategy was kind of to like lure the enemy cavalry into committing themselves and then use all three dragons to set the battlefield ablaze around and between the enemy formations. And it's super successful, as you said. Like it's dry, and he saw that. He made note of it. It's open, wide open. He can see everything. And that's another piece to this. Is like I think they were trying to flank and surround this smaller force or whatever. And the Targaryens had like a crescent shape set up here. And I think they give a little bit, and they sort of like they allow them to penetrate.
Yeah.
And then they're able to kind of like box them in, I guess.
The advantage of dragons also should not be, I think people are just like, oh, well, the dragons can just breathe fire, right? And so it's just like you have that aspect, but it's also think about like the scouting. Like nobody has that advantage of being able to get above the battlefield and see where everyone is. Like that, that's an aspect you would also have to think about in terms of like that's huge.
Yeah. Yep. Well, and yeah, you're right. Exactly. And also think about the aspect that like you don't want to rain down fire on your own men.
Yeah.
So while there is this battle going on, you've got to get in behind their forces and things like that. And they really had cavalry. They had infantry. I don't know what archery they had. Could they bring down a dragon? I think there are people, like I think it says that Visenya is wounded, I think, in this. A couple of them took arrows, and things like that. So, but it's a pretty epic battle. And if you get a chance to read the whole thing, and it gives you kind of a play-by-play, it's worth reading. I don't think we want to read the whole thing right now for sake of time, but and it's named the Field of Fire because they set the field on fire and surround them. They had nowhere to go, and they waited till they overcommitted.
Right here, I'll just read this little quote here. Roaring and screaming, urged on by horns and drums, the Gardeners and Lannisters charged through a storm of arrows. Down on their foes, sweeping aside the Targaryen spearmen, shattering their ranks. But by then Aegon and his sisters were in the air. Aegon flew above the ranks of his foes upon Balerion through a storm of spears and stones and arrows, swooping down repeatedly to bathe his foes in flame. Rhaenys and Visenya set fires upwind on the enemy and behind them. The dry grasses and strands of wheat went up at once. The winds fanned the flames and blew the smoke into the faces of the advancing ranks of the two kings. The scent of fire sent their mounts into panic. As the smoke thickened, horse and rider alike were blinded. Their ranks began to break as walls of fire rose on every side of them. Lord Mooten's men, safely upwind of the conflagration, waited with their bows and spears to make a short work of the burned and burning men who came staggering into the Inferno. The Field of Fire the battle was named after. Yeah, more than 4,000 men died in the flames. Another died. Tens of thousands were burned. Well, and Aegon, it says that he lost less than like 100 men, and he was outnumbered. They had 5 for every one of his men. So it's a huge victory. And I was right there. Yeah. Queen Visenya took an arrow in the shoulder.
Right. Yep. She takes an arrow. So right after that, it's battle's won. The Gardeners are wiped out, and he kind of knows that. His line is essentially ending here. The king and prince were on the battlefield, and both are killed. And Loren Lannister, though, actually survives, and that's sort of a big deal, because he survives, and then they're able to kind of keep that name and that house seat because he puts his sword
Unfortunately.
down. Unfortunately, yes. But, I mean, good for them, I guess, right? Like they survive and they get to keep their seat.
Yeah, he was captured the next day. The King of the Rock laid his sword and crown at Aegon's feet, bent the knee, and did him homage. And Aegon, true to his promises, lifted his beaten foe back to his feet and confirmed him in the lands and lordship, naming him Lord of Casterly Rock, Warden of the West. Lord Lorne's bannermen followed his example and did so, and so too did many lords of the Reach who had survived the dragon fire.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. So now the next bit here is interesting. He wants to move swiftly because this is, he's got now 4 kings defeated, and he moves to Highgarden just to make sure. He's already got, a pledge from Lannister. They're going to go back. You've got control over your stuff. You're now Warden of the West. And so then he goes to Highgarden, and that's where you have the Tyrells were there. And there's, I love Alt Shift X always throwing in a little rabbit hole for us. The idea that they specifically like stayed back and encouraged, the gardeners to go to war. That might have been their way to because they saw what had happened. They saw what was happening around the realm, and they go there and they get a pledge. Basically right away, Tyrell gets all of the gardener's lands and he's good. So now while they're thinking about trying to secure Old Town and going to deal with Hightower and stuff, he hears of another challenge coming his way. And it's from the north. Pretty big challenge. So where there were 55,000 strong, the north is bringing about 30 to 35,000, right? And bringing them down to the neck. And, this is Torrhen Stark. And it's just epic. So he has to fly there and deal with Torrhen at the Trident, and he gets there, and it's sort of like a little bit of a standoff, right? I mean, they're kind of feeling each other out. I think Torrhen has heard, he understands what had just happened and what had just taken place, and meanwhile, before all of the battles were taking place, he had assembled all of his banners and stuff, and it's pretty crazy. Now, there's a interesting piece here where Torrhen is called the King Who Knelt.
I was going to talk about Brandon Snow real quick.
Yeah.
Want me to jump into that?
Yeah, jump into it.
Yeah, so during Aegon, the first Targaryen's conquest, Aegon was preparing to march on Dorne, but when he received word that Torrhen Stark was marching south with 30,000 Northmen at his back, this is from the wiki, so Aegon led 45,000 troops to meet him at the Trident, and also his and his sister's dragons. At the Trident, Torrhen took advance from his bannermen while considering what had happened to Harrenhal in the Field of Fire. His bastard brother Brandon Snow offered to cross the Trident alone at night to sneak into the Targaryen camp and assassinate the dragons while they slept. However, instead, Torrhen set Brandon and his 3 maesters across the river to negotiate with Aegon, and the next day he knelt. There is a theory. However, I'll Shift X kind of reference this, and it's on the wiki here as well. In A Dance with Dragons, Bran Stark has several visions of the past through Winterfell's heart trees. One of these visions is of a pale, fierce, and dark-eyed young man who slices 3 branches off the weirwood and shapes them into arrows. It has been theorized that this may be Brandon Snow preparing arrows to kill the dragons of Aegon the Conqueror.
Yeah, that's pretty cool, actually. Pretty cool that he might have had a way to actually kill the dragons,
right?
And
because we know that we know later a scorpion bolt, or like a bastila, I believe is what we can do it, because it does kill some of them, and that's what we see in the show. Bronn fires one at Dracarys and hits Dracarys and brings him down. It doesn't kill him, and then of course we see the Night King kill one with an ice arrow.
I wonder if he. If there was any little bit of leverage that they went into that negotiation with, even though they come out just Wardens of the North, I wonder if it was sort of like, we want guaranteed, like, we are going to run the North and, no one is going to die. I mean, literally he spares all of his troops. No one is killed or whatever, but I wonder if they went in there like with this, we know how to kill your dragons, just so you know, just to be clear.
Yeah.
We have a way in which to do it. And maybe that confidence piece or whatever was just like, but we're willing. It's almost one of those things like, we're willing to submit. We just want to rule the North and be left alone, etc. But if you do try us, just know you're risking your dragon's life. I mean, that would be an epic conversation to have heard, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, because it's interesting that Gur mentions that. The idea that, his bastard brother could sneak in there.
Yeah, possibly, yeah.
So anyways, that's the king who knelt spared the North, right?
Mm-hmm.
Didn't want to. So, okay. So now, once again, Aegon and his queens parted company. Aegon turns south once more, marching towards Old Town. And this is where Visenya, for a second attempt at the Vale of Arryn, she heads to the Vale, and then Rhaenys heads for Sunspear, or Dorne. And Shara Arryn, again, hearing everything that has happened, is up there in the Eyrie and walled everything off. She's got garrisons, at the bloody gate. It's she again probably thinks it's a place that's super hard to penetrate, etc. And it's kind of a neat little story. Visenya takes her dragon up high again and lands right in the courtyard. I don't know if they don't really mention a whole lot of other troops, but she just goes there with her dragon, and she has Ronald Arryn in her lap when Shara Arryn shows up, and the boy is wanting to know. Says, "Mother, can I go flying with the lady?" The boy king asked. No threats were spoken. No angry words were exchanged. The two queens smiled at one another and exchanged courtesies instead. Mm-hmm. And I think that's pretty neat. I don't think Shara Arryn ever really wanted to fight. Right. I think she sent two requests to kind of make peace and come to some terms or whatever, because she knew, what perhaps she was facing. They're pretty close in proximity to Dragonstone, and I bet you they know quite a bit about the power of Valyria. Again, going back to the Andals showing up there at the Fingers and different things, and being those stories, right? Mm-hmm. That came with them. So the persecution that they may have faced or whatever. So that's pretty neat. So yeah, they explained they exchanged some of those pleasantries, and they surrender essentially. Swords are given by her garrison. She actually flies the little king around, like 3 times, and he has a blast, I'm sure. And when they land again, he is no longer a king; he is a warden. He is just a lord. So now, Rhaenys does not have an easy time.
No.
Right? So you want to talk about this a little bit? Just her trip down to Dorne. I mean, it was that's the one, because that is next, and it's really kind of left. It's not good,
Yeah,
doesn't have a
So Rhaenys finally, the queen took flight to her went to Sunspear, the ancient seat of House Martell, where she found the Princess of Dorne waiting in her abandoned castle. Mira Martell was 80 years of age, as the Maesters tell us, and had ruled the Dornishmen for 60 of those years. She was very fat, blind, and almost bald, her skin swallow and saggy. Argilac the Arrogant had named her the Yellow Toad of Dorne, but neither age nor blindness had dulled her wits. I will not fight you, Princess Mira told Rhaenys, nor will I kneel to you. Dorne has no king. Tell your brother that. I shall, Rhaenys replied, but when we come again, Princess, the next time we will come with fire and blood. Mm-hmm. Your words, said Princess Mira. Ours are unbowed, unbent, and unbroken. You may burn us, my lady, but you will not bend us, break us, nor make us bow. This is Dorne. You are not here. Return at your peril. Thus the queen parted, and Dorne remained unconquered.
Yeah.
And I guess we can kind of just quickly skip ahead. I haven't got to this, but just just through some history reading and stuff like that, is that actually they do try to take Dorne.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And she dies.
Rhaenys.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Yeah, and it's just, really what's neat about this whole piece is that the way in which, come on, we mentioned in 2 different situations, 2 big battles, one with Ors, one with Aegon, where they meet him on an open battlefield.
Yeah.
And Dorne's like, we're not doing that.
Well, at least with Ors Baratheon at Storm's End, it's kind of like, okay, well, the dragon can't hurt us because there's a storm. So they weren't really anticipating it.
Right, no, yeah. And right, but I still think the conditions, maybe they knew more. It doesn't go into a lot of detail, but you're right. Maybe there was, that was their reasoning. Actually, you're right about that, because they, some of them tried to stop Argilac from, having that fight. And I think he decided Now they say he was just overconfident and arrogant, and he just wanted to,
Yeah.
just have at him. But I actually think maybe it would have been then again, this is a maester telling the story.
Right.
Who, maybe the other side of it is that he knew the conditions were right and he decided to strike. Because it kind of took out the dragon, and they just played, the Targaryens played it well.
Yeah.
Lure
him into it.
Yeah.
Lure him into it.
Yeah. So
and then the one-on-one combat. That's the other part of that battle is, what if he'd killed Oris Baratheon? Mm-hmm. Then it over?
Right, and it's really that is a pivotal point, right? Because when those two lords start to fight, the battle does seem to kind of quiet, right? And his men are like looking to see if he wins, and that will give them renewed energy, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they lose all will to fight really after their lord is slain.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's the Bitten Dorn, and it's pretty neat. There is no king there, so there's no king to be conquered. She's a princess, and it's pretty neat. The way they only have the women and children out, and everyone else is kind of they've taken to the hills. They're hiding, and they can't be seen. This is almost like just a desert, desolate place, but it's populated. And even in the series, when who goes down there? When they travel, some of the Kingsguard travels down to Dorne. They talk about where are the people? Almost like when you go north too. When Robert says the same thing, where are your people at? Both of those two kingdoms seem kind of desolate or scarcely populated, but they are. There's a lot of people there. Now Aegon heads back to Old Town, and basically is there with Lord Hightower. The High Septon had locked himself in like the Starry Sept for 7 days. Septon and Hightower both kind of decide after, and I think Hightower was super religious. It said that his son was also part of that the religious army that's in Old Town, and their name's not coming to me right now, but and they decide to open their gates, because they've seen everything that has happened. Hightower just wants to remain, the Lord, the overseer there, and they hold a big coronation, a second coronation there in front of many more, lords were, they showed back up, and there are maesters there to record it, and it's done by the High Septon, so it's more official, unites everybody. The only kingdom that's not really represented there is Dorne. Yeah. So that's Aegon's second coronation, essentially. Did I miss anything? I'm sure I missed a lot, but
I think that's mostly it.
That's mostly it, isn't it? Yeah.
Because then it just, I believe, it goes into Aegon the First of his reign.
Yeah, and they talk about scattered throughout there was the idea that the swords would be sent, down the river or back to Aegon Fort, which will later be King's Landing, and they're going to make that Iron Throne with all of the swords and pretty neat. I think the pictures in the book and stuff, that's just a massive freaking welded together throne of swords and iron. So
okay. Let's move on to cool connections.
Yeah.
So this episode, I thought we'd take just a deeper look into Balerion, otherwise known as the Black Dread, which was Aegon's dragon. Balerion, called the Black Dread, is one of the 3 great dragons of Aegon the First Targaryen and his sisters, who were used to conquer most of Westeros during the War of the Conquest. Balerion dies of old age in 94 AC. So, he lives for a long time.
Yeah.
During the reign of King Jaehaerys I Targaryen, about 200 years old. Balerion was named after the ancient god of the Valyrian freehold. He was born in Valyria. Balerion was one of the 5 dragons Aenar Targaryen brought with him when he fled to Dragonstone to survive the doom of Valyria. Then, obviously, we know Aegon uses him in a lot of the wars that he fights over in Essos, and then again uses them in the Wars of the Seven Kingdom. So we talked about almost all of that. According to Song, at the end of the war, Balerion helped to forge the Iron Throne by melting the sword of Aegon's fallen enemies.
Let's go.
And do we know how
Good dragon.
know how Aegon dies?
How Aegon dies?
Yeah.
I think we had said earlier that it was wasn't it more old age?
Aegon the First dies in 37 AC at Dragonstone. Obviously we're gonna get to his
I believe he just gets.
I think it just says he dies from a stroke at the age of 64.
Yeah. So just kind of natural.
Yeah, so just kind of a natural thing, because then Balerion actually passes down to some of his things. Maegor the First uses it. Balerion was claimed by his son Prince Maegor, who had long coveted his father's mount and had not claimed another dragon because he considered all others unworthy.
Right. Yeah. Maegor's crazy.
Yeah, Janos Aaron imprisoned his brother Lord Ronal and declared himself independent of the Iron Throne. Maegor rode the Black Dread to the Vale and put down his rebellion. When he was exiled, Maegor took because Maegor is crazy.
Right.
Took Balerion with him to Pentos. After his brother King Aenys I died, Maegor flew back to Westeros on Balerion's back to claim the Iron Throne. In his reign as king, Maegor used Balerion to destroy the Sept of Remembrance and many other battles against the Faith Malignant. In his battle beneath the God's Eye, Maegor uses Balerion to kill his nephew, Prince Aegon, and his dragon, Quicksilver.
Yeah, that's pretty neat. That's in the story, Sons of the Dragon. And really the idea is sons of the first son, right? So Aenys' son was supposed to be sort of like the next in line, right? But I think things were out of control at that point, and they needed a strong Targaryen. And I believe Aegon's one of his wives, Visenya, I think is still alive. I think that's her son. I could be wrong. Maegor. I could be. I'll have to look all that up. So correct me if I'm wrong. And calls him back, and like he's like the second son, I think. Yeah. And it's just kind of cool, So comes back, and I mean, he's Maegor the Cruel, man. I mean, even with his own family, like there's some pretty cool stuff. We'll have to do a whole episode.
Well, we will. We'll get to that.
Son. Yeah, it comes up in here, but don't let me forget to tie in the dialogue.
And then, of course, when Fire and Blood comes out, we'll be rehashing all this stuff again. So, then Balerion passes to Viserys the First. The last rider of Balerion was Viserys the First Targaryen, then still a prince. He was Balerion's rider at the time of his death in 94 AC. Viserys never claimed another dragon. It doesn't say how Balerion died, but I'm gonna guess just old age. Along with other Targaryen dragon skulls, Balerion's huge skull used to hang on the wall in the Red Keep throne room after the War of the Usurper King, aka Robert's Rebellion. Robert had Balerion's skull removed and stored in a cellar along with the others. And then there's it says that there's a nice picture of it in this book, like that's referenced in the thing. And then actually some people, obviously the fans, the World of Ice and Fire like fan art is amazing.
It's awesome.
Just Game of Thrones, the whole A Song of Ice and Fire, the fan art people do, and then the wiki references it. It's sweet. So I included too in our notes here. And then he's referenced in just about every book that exists. Every single book, Balerion the Dragon is at least referenced at almost about 1 point.
I mean, he is the conqueror.
Yeah, really, yeah. Yeah, and then Daenerys, here's a quote here from Daenerys. This must be from a vision or something she had. His fire was as black as a scale, his wings so fast that the whole towns were swallowed up in their shadow as he passed overhead. And then Artisan Whitebeard. Balerion the Black Dread was 200 years old when he died during the reign of Jaehaerys the Conciliator. He was so large he could swallow an auroch whole. A dragon never stops growing, your grace, so long as he has food and freedom.
Wow.
Which is when they talk about later where the dragons are so small that because they chain them up and start to get rid of them.
Yeah. Yep, he's one of the last greats. I mean, epic, super cool.
Isn't that the dragon? Is it in the show? Is that the skull that?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's the one that when it's down near the Black Cell or down.
Yeah,
they've taken them down and put them away.
And Cersei says, "I know how to kill the dragons." And I believe that's the dragon skull. She shoots the scorpion bolt through.
Yeah. Yep. Let's see. Well, that scorpion bolt was through Rhaenys dragon, but so I don't remember how exactly because Balerion just dies of old age, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Balerion the Dread.
No, I'm talking about in the show. Remember the show when Cersei's telling?
Yeah, she's downstairs.
She's telling.
Yeah, you were wondering which dragon that was.
Yeah.
Oh, I still think that's Balerion.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah,
Dread. Yeah.
Cersei uses a scorpion bolt to show Jaime.
Okay. I
we
thought
can
you were
kill.
saying
We can kill.
Balerion.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought you were saying Balerion was killed by one.
No.
Yeah, there it is, guys. That's a lot in Aegon's Conquest, but it's fun. There's more to get into. There's more nitty-gritty detail and connections. You can pull some of those houses and families, and we can make more connections. We will probably have to go back and reference it quite a bit as we move forward, but that's it, man. So now we're on to Send a Raven. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I want to thank you guys for your support. Appreciate you guys sending us ravens, and we always do follow-up Friday, so check out the Facebook page. You can join us there. We if you had comments on today's episode or corrections, things you want us to look at, or further questions, whatever, post them there. This is a raven from Maester Jaime of the White Owl and Lady Cat of the Woodland Realm. And I think I'll read it to you guys, kind of summarize a little bit as we go. It's a little bit long, but Lady Cat of the Woodland Realm and I work together. This was sent to us by Jaime. So we've been discussing at great length this chapter. So this is the upcoming chapter, Dany, right? Is that what's coming up next?
Yes.
Daenerys? Okay. Specifically, the wedding night scene. We wanted to hear your thoughts about the major differences with this scene between the book and the show, as I'm sure you guys will already discuss in the podcast. But we had some thoughts too. Lady Cat and I were very bothered by the way they portrayed this scene in the show. We could not understand why they had to change the scene into a rape scene between Dany and Khal Drogo, instead of the rather tender and loving scene that it is in the books. It is even said, but he never hurt her in the book. The only thing we could come up with for the reason of the change is to show some growth from the character of Dany. Yes, in both show and book, Dany's relationship with Khal Drogo allowed her to grow stronger and become more independent and not so tethered by fear of her brother. In the books, she is empowered by the love for Khal Drogo and her queenly power she held by his side, and thus it allows her to stand up to her brother and many others thereafter. So this evolution happens regardless. There didn't need to be this extra struggle for Dany to reach it, in their opinion. We also thought it was quite contradictory in the show because they do end up loving each other quite deeply, and the evolution seems kind of odd and violated considering how they started out. Oftentimes in this series, we see many women having to succumb to sexual experiences because of arranged marriages, some worse than others, thinking about Cersei and Robert, Sansa and Ramsay. That one is extremely horrible. Even, Catelyn and Ned at the beginning, also being clear that all of these examples, except Sansa, were not rape, but were experiences that were not what these women really wanted. Those moments for them are real and terrifying for them, but followed suit with their character arc. Thus, it would have been nice for the one good scene, the one arranged marriage that actually turned out well. They say that it could have,
right.
They could have portrayed that differently. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So also, yes, the Dothraki are rough people, but it showed another side of what they are capable of. They are still people who love and care, not some savages. So like Gur has said, he does not like making people all evil or all good. Everyone has a little bit of both. The rape scene is entirely unnecessary in our opinion, and lack of respect. Probably the only time in the show that we were disappointed in their choice of adaptation. But again, what are your guys' thoughts? I know this is PG-13 podcast, right? So we won't talk. We weren't sure how much we could really talk about that. So and do not be sorry they wrote a book. Yeah, no, it's great. Thank you, Maester Jaime of the White Owl. That's what you do, right? Mm-hmm. You read and you know things. And Lady Cat of the Woodland Realm. We appreciate the Raven. What do you think there, Matt? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I would say that the reason they do it that way in the show is I think it's, like Daenerys is, I mean, everybody's character, especially like the ones who have made it this far, is they all overcome something like tragic. And it seems like the characters who overcome the most tragedy are the ones who kind of succeed the most.
Yeah.
And so I think with Daenerys, it's to show her, she has the scene with one of the handmaidens that kind of teaches her like how to like this is how you should, you know,
handle him. Yeah.
Handle Khal Drogo. And I believe actually there is a line about that. I'm not like trying to find it because I didn't really think about it. But when I was re-listening to it, the first book, I kind of just heard it, and I think it's just one line where she says like something about like her like it's that, but in the show it's like a full scene.
Sure, yeah.
And I think that's just to show like Daenerys is like it's all about learning how to play the game. Yeah, the Game of Thrones.
I would say for me, you know, I totally get what they're saying here because, you know, in the books, her hardship is made more clear. When we see her in the film, or I'm sorry, in the HBO series, looks like she's being treated well. Looks like she has a little bit of a rough relationship with her brother, but she's being taken care of in Pentos by Illyrio. And in the book, you get a little bit of a backstory, some more flashback as to the hardships and just wanting to go home and, you know, living on the street, the beggar king, and all of that stuff. So you got that was sort of her hardship and her trial, right? And so that maybe it didn't seem like you needed to have a continued hardship with Khal Drogo. She's already nervous and scared in that of itself, and it ends up being a good thing because of who she is, and she's just beautiful and she's kind and what have you, and that she's an influencer too. Yeah. So
okay, I actually just found it, or I found some of it. So it's not in the book, at least the chapter I'm reading, which I think is Dany 3. It's like chapter 23. It kind of talks here about even the nights before, even the nights brought no relief. Khal Drogo ignored her when they rode. So this is talking when they're like riding around, like he's just ignoring her. And then it talks about like still same thing. He kind of takes her from behind to a Thraki fashion. Says for which Dany was grateful because she doesn't want to like kind of here like, and then like she kind of learns how to do it later. So it still kind of happens.
Are you talking about is that from the book or the show?
This is the book.
Okay.
This is the book.
Gotcha.
Dany knew she could not endure a moment no longer. She would kill herself rather than go on. She decided one night. So still, Dany is not super pleased with the way it's going. Yeah.
It's going.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. I mean, they pulled a line. I mean, I think it gets to the point where, you know, both show and book where she learns and takes control, but I think it's just like they really pulled that out and highlighted it in the show, and that's sort of the piece that is rubbing them the wrong way a little bit. You know, like, do we really need to go that far? You know,
and again, the other thing is like with the show is you have only so much time, so sometimes you have to kind of move some things around, change some things in order to kind of speed things along. And so I think in the show it makes kind of more sense to do it that way, because that way it shows like because think about the things leading up to it is where her brother basically sells her off, and then it's only a couple episodes later where we have the thing where Viserys like slaps her and she's like, if you slap me again, like I'm Khaleesi, I am, you know, like you will not do that again, and all that kind of stuff. So I think that's why they did it, is mostly just because of the show. But I mean, I agree with them. I mean, like she does end up loving Khal Drogo, and then it doesn't work. Right. But a line that I've actually heard quite a lot in the books, where you just plowing through it again, is the things about like the things we love are the things that like, you know, cause us the most problem, or like that's kind of what. And if you look at it in the show, is I mean, Jorah Mormont loves this woman that's his wife, and that's why he ends up, you know, stealing slaves so he can keep up with her lifestyle. Right. You know, Robb Stark loves this woman, you know, two different characters in the book and the show, and that's ultimately what ends up being his downfall. And then later also when Dany starts to kind of love Daario Naharis, you know, maybe it's because of Khal Drogo and his dying that she realizes like, I can't take you to Westeros with me. Like, sorry. Like,
yeah, there's the love for the throne that she has to balance with that other, you know, passion and peace. You know, same with Cersei, love for her children, the extents to which she would go, and then also just once they're gone, the love for power and control. So yeah, it's a theme for sure throughout the series. So, But hey, honestly, thank you.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, and
Mr.
we'll
Jamie
we'll
Lady
talk
Cat.
about this a lot more next week when we dive into this chapter.
For sure, absolutely. So that's a look ahead there. All right, guys, it's time to man the wall. If you would like, head on over to our Patreon page, patreon.com/bend the knee. I think after today, since we've gotten through some of this Aegon Conquest stuff, Matt and I can now start jumping into the Black Council series that we'd like to do. Book to show comparison, as we said, is going up. I think we have a friend coming in and out of town who we're going to watch that with, and so we'll have a good time there. Meat and Cheese should be up, actually, by the time you've listened to this. That should be there, new episode of that. So head over there and check that out. And I think that's about it for Man the Wall. Join us on Facebook.com/Bend the Knee Podcast to join in all the discussions. When you talk to us there, I mean, you really do influence the show. That's the whole point.
Absolutely.
It's a book club, it's community, so we like to hear your thoughts and kind of help us provide some commentary and what have you. So huge thanks to everybody who's already done that. The show is literally 10 times better because you guys participate and you guys make it happen. So, all right, man, I think it's time for our farewell. Yeah,
so we want to thank you for playing the Game of Thrones. And our next episode, we will be discussing Chapter 11, Dany 2.
Yep. If you like our podcast, don't forget to subscribe, like us, write a review, or leave a comment, or send us a raven at btkcast@gmail.com.
We'll see you in a week, and remember, fire and